Sweet? Tangy? How does a grower get them off the tree at just the right time? We're about to find out. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Liz Colby, and I'm with Practical Farmers of Iowa. Accompanying me behind the scenes and providing technical support is Phoebe Eichhorst. We will shortly be broadcasting live with Emma Johnson of Buffalo Ridge Orchard in Central City, Iowa. And throughout the summer, we've seen how the team at Buffalo Ridge Orchard handles their packing shed. We've explored their high tunnel cherry tomatoes. And today, in keeping with the season, we're headed to the apple orchard to learn how Emma and Marcus determine when is the right time to pick different varieties of apples. But first, like an old movie, we'll start with the credits at the top. We'd like to thank our major sponsors for their support of our virtual field day season. Their support helps make this virtual field day season possible, which features over 60 virtual field days. And guess what? You can attend all of them free of charge. Thank you, sponsors. Practical Farmers of Iowa is a farmer-led nonprofit based out of Ames. We specialize in farmer-to-farmer knowledge sharing and farmer-led research with a mission to equip farmers to build resilient farms and communities. All are welcome at PFI. We invite you to learn more about our organization and access our vast collection of resources at practicalfarmers.org. This virtual field day will run until 1:05 p.m. Central Time. If you have questions for Emma during the field day, please type them into the comment box on Facebook, and I'll do my best to relay your questions to her during our discussion. And at the conclusion of this event, please give us your feedback via the online survey. We'll post that link in the comment box. Virtual events are new to us, and we'll be continuing them through the winter, so we're excited to get your feedback and improve as we go. All right, let's turn it over to Emma.
Thanks, Liz. So I'm Emma Johnson. We run Buffalo Ridge Orchard with my parents, and I'll tell you a little bit about our orchard. So we have about 4,500 apple trees and then about 300 pear trees. The pears are not producing yet. So we're a fairly young orchard. My mom planted the first couple hundred trees in 2003. And then we expanded, and Marcus and I joined the orchard in 2012 after we had planted several apple trees. So the majority of our orchard were planted from 2009 and on. So we have a fairly young orchard. All of the trees are planted on dwarf rootstock. They're either on Bud 9, Geneva 11, and I think those are the only two. We do have some, yeah, I think Bud 9 and Geneva 11 are the bulk of our orchard. So the first part of our orchard, we're planting 6 feet on center for our in-row spacing. This is Chieftain. These are our Chieftain block right here, and they're 6 feet on center. And as our plantings that we've done more recently are closer to 3 to 4, depending on the variety. So we have over 50 varieties of apples. And when we came in 2012, a lot of the varieties were fruiting for the very first time. And being novice and green around the ears and not knowing much about apple orchards or trying to figure out when something was right, we did what most people do, which is we pick it off the tree, we take a bite, and we decide, does it taste good? Sure, let's pick it. And as we accumulated more and more varieties, you know, there'd be a day where we were testing 20 varieties. Well, first of all, we'd have a stomach ache because we were trying so many apples. But secondly, our palate is just not refined enough to know if something is right, especially if it's supposed to be a more tart apple. You can really err on the side of taking something that's more starchy and too tart and isn't going to do well as far as storage. So we did some research. We talked to other orchards to see how they managed it. And there's some really easy ways to figure out how to pick apples. And it's really actually taken a lot of stress out of how we decide what are priorities from week to week. So some things about apples and how they ripen. They do not ripen the same year to year. A lot of things can impact when an apple ripens. Bloom time is a big one. This year, the bloom was pretty late. So we anticipated it was going to be a late season. But a lot of times too, heat units. So if it's a late bloom and then we get a lot of heat early, that speeds everything up. So sometimes the blooming will still have a pretty normal harvest. This year, everything was running a little later, but now it seems like the late season apples are going to start pushing into the mid-season apples. So we're kind of through most of our early mid-season. We're getting into our late later to mid-season, and then we'll be hitting our late season, early to mid-October here. So another thing that can set when a apple ripens is just how heavy the fruit set is too. So if you just have a few apples on the tree, you're probably going to find that that's going to ripen probably a week to 10 days earlier than a tree that's fully loaded or a tree that's overloaded. So that's something to take into consideration too. So you might test some apples, but then you might have a couple trees that were underthinned or overthinned, and you might want to adjust when you're out picking in the field. So there's a couple of ways to tell if an apple is ripe without doing any specific test, and we call it just by looking at the appearance. So there's the background color. So I'll show you, this is Crimson Crisp here. So it's red, it looks ripe. It has, if I turn it over, it has a nice kind of whitish, almost light yellow background color. The calyx is open. These are all sort of indications that this is probably close to ripe, if not really ripe. But sometimes that doesn't always apply. So this is another instance. This is a Chieftain. Iowa's apple. It was developed by Iowa State. It's starting to get kind of a whiter background color. It's nice and red. The calyx has been open. It's been open for several weeks. It seems ready. So I'm going to do some testing. We're going to kind of look at the difference between that Crimson Crisp and Chieftain and some of the other varieties that I picked. So I also have Empire here. It's a nice sweet tart apple. Again, from looking at it visually, I'd say this one's ready to go. And the other thing about all of the varieties that I have, Chieftain, Crimson Crisp, Empire, and now this is Liberty here. It looks nice and red, burgundy red. Liberty gets really burgundy. Calyx is open. All four of these, all the apples look pretty much the same on the tree. So they're what we call closer to a clean pick than one that we would come back, you know, 1 or 2 times and pick just a few off the tree, and the next time I have a big picking and then, you know, finish it off. So we want to make sure we test and figure out when they're actually at peak ripeness, because for our pickers and for us to go out there and try to determine the difference between this red and which one's more red and which one's more ready is nearly impossible. And so that's one reason I wanted to kind of show the conundrum with trying to figure out when to pick these really all red apples. And a year like this year, where we had really cool temps at night, it really makes for beautiful, beautiful fall color, beautiful red apples, but also can make it a little tricky to figure out when to pick. So the first thing I do is I test the pressure. So we use, it's a Wagner pressure gauge, and it's for this use. And I was trying to remember where we purchased this. Probably was Peach Ridge, maybe. So it's just it has a little dial on it. And then this end here is what I put through the apple. And you want to press it in until it reaches the kind of base of this lip, and then that'll give you a reading. And then there's a reset button here that resets it so you can test the next apple. So what I do, I'll start with the Liberty here. I like to peel both on the side that has less color and the side that has more color, because those oftentimes will have different pressures. I also like to, normally, if I was doing this to really figure out what to pick, I would test an apple that I thought looked a little underripe, and I'd test an apple that looked really ripe, just so I could see a comparison. And you'd be surprised how many times they're closer together than you think, as far as whether they're ready. And then this is that Chieftain. So it comes with this nice peeler, so we don't have to get anything out of the kitchen to do the test. So what I'm testing here is pressure. So most, we like to pick apples as close to peak ripeness as we can. And if our goal was to store these apples for a year in a controlled atmosphere storage unit and sell them, the following year, we'd have a much different strategy than what we probably have now. We have walk-in coolers for our storage. We do a little bit with some Smart Fresh with ethylene inhibitors, but not too much of that. And so our real goal is to just have a nice crunchy apple that tastes really good. So that sort of changes what pressure and what starch we're looking for. So I'm going to press this in until I hit that lip, and we're at about 18. I'll show you the next one. So this is what it ends up looking. So industry standard, most apples you want to be around 15, but that's not all apples are the same. So Mac might be a little bit softer. So this is my Empire, it's at 14. So that's telling me it's ready. We don't want it to lose too much more texture. And then the other side that was a little less ripe is closer at 18. So it's getting close. Sorry, I'm really dripping. There's a really juicy apple. This is Crimson Crisp. So we say industry standard for most apples when they're ready to pick is 15. Crimson Crisp, this one's at 20. So we'll see where that tests out for starch. Yep, this one is also at 20. Okay, now we're at the Chieftain. Okay, we're close to 20. Yeah, 20, 21 on the Chieftain. So that gives me kind of an idea. Okay, a lot of these are close, but some of them, like the Chieftain maybe seems a little less ripe. The Crimson Crisp, because of the pressure, would tell me maybe it's a little less ripe, or the Empire and the Liberty, or the Empire is maybe closer. So then I like to cut it in half crosswise. So we're cutting it horizontally, not longitudinally to the core. Because we're going to now test the starch. So we're going to figure out how much starch to sugar there is in these apples. And as Marcus is pointing out to me, another visual test is the seeds. So this is another, look at the seeds are black, they're not white. So that's a really good indication that it's getting there. They're getting close. Sometimes the seeds can be black or dark colored for quite some time though.
Hey, Emma,
So,
can I ask you a couple questions while you're cutting those?
Sure.
So the first one is, there's a question about calyx being open. Can you describe more clearly or show us a little closer on the camera
Sure.
how an open calyx looks compared to perhaps a description of a closed calyx?
Yep. So the calyx is the bottom part. Oh, this is a good one. Do you see the very end of that apple? You can't see the inside of that apple. If you had a microscope that you could look into the middle of the apple, you won't be able to in the very center. And then let's compare that to this one. That's open. So that first one is closed and the other one's open.
And then back to the pressure for a second. So the higher pressure would mean that the apple is yet underripe if it's up at 20? Yeah,
sort of. I mean, when I say the standard is you like to pick an apple around 15 to 16. That's a broad stroke around for lots of varieties of apples. So, and that's sort of the trick I wanted to show, because Crimson Crisp tested to be the highest pressure, but I think when we do the starch test, you're going to see that it's actually the most ripe apple that we have on the table. So there is variation there. So it's a multiple of layering of tests. But if you pair the pressure with the starch and you keep good year-to-year notes that, oh, you know, the max, they test out closer to 12, because if we harvest them before 12, they just taste like a potato, you know. So like if you can keep those records, then that'll kind of, each variety really has their specific pressure that they want for each apple.
And to some degree, does the crispness of the apple kind of speak to the pressure as well?
Yeah, so the pressure is going to really tell you how crisp and crunchy that apple is going to be. So if you let that if you let that apple hang, if it'll hang and it doesn't drop, until it gets lower and lower pressure, it means that it's taking less resistance for me to put that tester in, which means it's not going to be as crunchy and crisp. So there's varieties where a fully ripened apple that is really red and has background color, Macintosh is a really great example of this, it's just going to be mush. So you know, we pick for the best texture and best flavor combination. That's our goal. I'm gonna go ahead and spray these because after you cut them, you kind of want to spray them pretty close to when you cut them. So we just have an iodine solution, and I'll spray these and then I'll talk about what's in that solution. So I just use a spray bottle. I should put my safety goggles on. Just pretend I have safety goggles on.
Bad, Emma.
Here, you want to spray them, Marcus? Here, the wind's coming. Getting all the signs iodined. Okay, so you want to wait about a minute, 2 minutes to do the reading. So this is the solution. We get it from Peach Ridge Orchard. We get a couple of these bottles every year, so we can, when we do our tests every week. And then we just put it in a spray bottle, as you see, and then we can just spray the apples. Another way that you can do it is you can have it like a shallow cookie sheet or pan that you put just a little bit of the solution and you dip the apples. But we find you use a lot more iodine that way. And since we have lots of different varieties, we go through a lot of these bottles. So we like the spray method a little bit more.
Is there a difference between the iodine in that solution and iodine you could maybe get at a drugstore or somewhere else?
It has to do with the concentration. So this is a 10% solution. That's a good question. I think we've always just used the this solution because it's what it's meant for. There was actually earlier this spring, when we went to purchase it, there's a little bit of a shortage. So we were looking, it looked like we could get it from, there are a lot of pharmaceuticals. So if you can just find a 10% solution, or if you're willing to like do a dilution for yourself, then go for it.
Okay.
It's, anyway, but it is hazardous. It kind of reminds me of like back in the days when I helped my parents castrate pigs and we'd spray it and stuff like that. But so I typically would wear gloves too, but that didn't happen either. So I don't know if you guys can see the apples. You got a good view of them?
Yeah, we can see that the one on the left there is getting pretty dark.
Yeah. So one thing about apples is they ripen from the inside out. So what we're seeing here is the iodine is going to react to the starch. It's not going to react to the sugar. So what we're seeing here with and I think I am, before I pick these up, I am going to put a glove on, or I'm going to have a yellow hand for.
Very good, very good.
What we're looking here, so this is the Chieftain. It's pretty much black. And this is the Crimson Crisp. And I did really well of finding one that was a little less ripe because I did one yesterday that was completely white. So this one looks pretty close. This is the Empire. It's also looking pretty close. And then this is the Liberty. I would say the Liberty is getting there too. It's pretty close. It's that Empire and Liberty are pretty similar. So we have this, Cornell University has sort of the Starch Scale figured out for us. So I don't know if you guys can see. So
yeah,
I have it. It's more starch when it's black and it's less starch. And below you can see, sorry for the movement here, there's numbers below. And every apple you kind of want to harvest them at a little bit different ranges. So like a Mac, we normally want to harvest closer to between 3 and 4. If we let it get to between 4, 5, or 6, it's gonna lose too much texture. And one way for us to kind of figure out where we want different apples to be is we have this. Sometimes we do use Smart Fresh after we pre-harvest, and they give you this really, I think, a nice booklet that tells you sort of ranges. Now, their goals when they publish this book is for maximum storage. So we can kind of, at least it's basically like a continuum for us to base our decisions. So, but they have about a dozen varieties, a lot of them that we have. So they have Empire as an example, and they have their Starch Index for a 1 to 6 scale. We have a 1 to 8 scale, the one that we have. So we compare it to that one. And they even have the target mean firmness. So we use that as sort of our indicator. So when I should have remembered what we were, where we were at with the Empire. I think we were close to 16 pounds. And when I look at my starch indicator, so again, I think, I'm trying to see, when I look at this, I would say it's somewhere between 3 and 4 right now. Marcus, are you disappearing? Yeah. Where would you say it is? Maybe between 4 and 5 a little bit? 4. It's close to 4. So I would say, because we want maximum flavor on our Empire, I would go closer to 5. We're even maybe a little closer to 6. So when I figured out what were our priorities this week, I prioritized Crimson Crisp, because Crimson Crisp, I think, is a lot closer to like a 6 when I look at this chart, a 5 and 6, compared to everything else that I have on this table. And the thing that's great about Crimson Crisp is it obviously is not losing texture, but we have found that if we harvest it before this stage, that we harvest it before, when it's just a little bit more underripe, it really actually doesn't store as well. So we really like it to be maximum ripeness if we can when we're harvesting it. Let me, you have other questions, Liz?
Yeah, so Steve just wanted to clarify, can you access that chart through Cornell, and can you order hard copies, do you know, or did you get that somewhere special?
I believe we did harvest this. I think we purchased this. Marcus is behind the camera here. I think we purchased this through Cornell. I think it's on their website, Steve. So
you can download and print your own too.
I think you can also, yeah, you can download and print your own. I think we were really super lazy and we just got it from them because they like laminated it for us. And
yeah, the glossy paper is so nice.
Yeah,
I want to get that.
Actually, now looking at it, we might have gotten it with the Smart Fresh. So
okay.
the Smart Fresh is it's basically NAA, right?
MCP, 1 MCP.
Okay, it's 1 MCP. See, I'm not the person that should be talking about it, but we use it for a lot of our late season apples that we know we're going to be storing a little bit later. Actually, we start kind of this Sweet 16 on, we start kind of treating all of our apples, because it's like you can't store apples that haven't been treated with it. So we treat those in the cooler, and we found that it extends the life of apples by a couple months. So it's helped us from a marketing plan not have to move everything all at once. And we're not certified organic, so it's a product that's not organic, but we feel like it helps us mark our apples and make sure we remain profitable as far as we're not having apples go out of condition. So, and it's an ethylene blocker, so it's not a fungicide. It's not something that we ourselves in our orchard would consider harmful. It just sort of delays the speed in which the apples lose firmness. So let me see. Trying to see if I covered everything.
So, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I feel like testing, in the most part, has given us, it allows us to make a plan and make a strategy every week. So we know, okay, this is the emergency. This is the thing that we really need to pick earlier in the week. And you'd be amazed in 4 days how much things will change, especially since we're getting some warm days here. It had been some cool days for a while there. So I think some things kind of slowed down. But yeah, did you have a question, Liz?
Well, how frequently are you testing each variety? And do you keep a chart of that somewhere, or how do you communicate that to your pickers?
Oh, right. I wish that we were so organized that we had a chart. I mean, it comes to, we try to test the apples that we know are ripening. In the beginning, I think it's not that we've gotten lazy. It's just that maybe we've gotten to really understand the varieties a little bit better on when they should be ready, and better at just doing visual checks and then thinking, okay, this is getting ready. Let me pick a couple. So every week I try to harvest all the ones that I think, I look back at when they harvested last year. I try to pick them close to the right time, the same time, or maybe a little early when I did my orchard walk on Sunday and they look like they were really ready, I might pick them and then I test them. And one important thing is you want to test them as close to when you just picked them too, because they are going to change after you pick them. They aren't going to stay the same, especially with the pressure. So it used to be, and some of the recommendations are that you test it what you think is 4 weeks out, and you keep testing it week after week after week. We just have too many varieties to be managing and to be picking that much. So, you know, once we have a handle of, okay, Liberty harvests with oftentimes snow sweet. So I know that they're both starting to look ready, so I'm going to test them together. Or, you know, you start kind of pairing apples together, even if you're not sure about when the ripening time is. But then there's always a few apples that for whatever reason you think should be ready, and you're glad you tested them because they aren't. And like Chieftain would be an example. We've often harvested Chieftain with Crimson Crisp, but as you guys can all see, they look like potatoes right now. But some of that might be, we have a really good fruit load this year. The past couple of years we've had really large Chieftain, and they probably ripened a little bit earlier then because we had fewer apples on the tree.
And what about apples that aren't red? Are there good ways to look at those apples, visually?
Yeah, visually it's the same. I mean, the calyx is a good indication, but I think golds are equally as hard as reds, and they're very hard to harvest because the truth is most gold apples you're going to harvest and they're going to look green when you're harvesting them. So really doing the pressure test is really a good indication, because when a gold starts losing pressure, there's no going back from that. And then also the starch test, and that even, we just picked our honey gold apples, and I think it's the earliest we've ever picked them because they're like the forgotten tree that we get done with some of our early season goldens and we kind of forget about the honey gold until we hit some of our later season golds, and we always end up picking it too late. And I always put a note that says, keep your eye on honey gold. Well, this year I picked a honey gold, and it was, we probably picked it about a week to 10 days late. We probably should have picked it last week, but so
Get any sort of storage on it.
So, I mean, the thing is if you pick a gold too late, you're just not going to get the storage life on them. But you also don't want to err on the side of them just tasting like a potato. So I really do think with golds, the starch tests and the pressure tests are really going to tell you what you need to do. And that doesn't mean, I mean, a lot of our goldens end up being clean picks. So we just picked last week, we picked Silken, and that's another apple that we picked way too early, because when the calyx is open for a long time, when you taste it, it tastes mild, it tastes sweet from, beginning of August. I mean, you could pick it in beginning of August and think that you picked a fully ripe apple. And now we pick it mid-September because we started doing the starch test and we realized, there's a lot more sugars. And for that reason, we thought by picking it so early, almost a month early, they were not storing as well. So there is that, if you pick something so it's all starch, it actually won't store as well. There's that sweet spot that you want to have plenty of sugar, plenty of integrity in that apple. Yeah.
And for the varieties that you aren't doing clean picks on, are there visual cues that you use with your pickers to go for first?
Yeah. So a couple apples that definitely aren't clean picks are Sweet 16 and Honeycrisp. And that's it. The thing about visual tests is you can tell when the background color is changing because the intensity of the red, or then there's a little hue of yellow for the goldens, and that's a tough thing to train. I often can get people to pick the ones that look absolutely they are 100% sure with, and then we have to go through that row again and pick those ones that maybe don't have as much red because they're further in the tree, or they don't have as much golden color but they're further in the tree. So the things that I have them often look for, and it goes variety by variety, is sometimes the calyx, but honestly it's generally background color. So it depends on the apple. So for Gala, for example, we pick that mostly based on spot color. It's normally a 2 pick for us. We look for a white background color, and generally at the bottom of the calyx, you should see there should be a hue of, there can be like a hue of green, but it shouldn't be, you're not looking for a gold background on the Gala, because that's going to be a mushy, kind of a mushy Gala. And then with the Sweet 16 and the Honeycrisp, Sweet 16, you're not looking for a gold background. You're looking for that changing from kind of a limey green to a light yellow. And then for the Honeycrisp, you're looking for a light yellow. You're not looking for a gold, you're looking for a light yellow. And that's sometimes hard for people to see, especially I think this type of lighting right now is hard. It's easier when it's a cloudy day. Some people get it. I feel like some pickers get it, other pickers don't. And so what we found has been the easiest is if we do the first pass, everyone gets exactly what they think is for sure right, and then we do a second pass all together and really focus on getting those ones that are kind of the more questionable ones. And then the other thing about Honeycrisp that we do is that we actually sort of cure them at 55 degrees for a week. And we found it helps the apple sort of dehydrate a little bit and have a little less for storage issues when we put it in the, it's kind of a slow chill down then, so it gets those apples, although this year it was really cold when we were picking the Honeycrisp, so maybe they were already pre-cured. But we found when you take, you know, it's an 80-degree day and you're picking Honeycrisp and then you put them in a 34-degree cooler, some weird things can kind of happen. So we also feel like when you harvest, it gives you a little bit more leeway of if you have a picker that's maybe not necessarily harvesting at the background color that you need, that there is a little bit of changing of that background color in the cooler, but we still try to really push for looking for the right background color for the Honeycrisp.
And do you do that curing in a separate part of your cooler or just
Yep.
in a?
We luckily, because of where Honeycrisp sits, we have 3 coolers, and one's kind of our chill down cooler, and then the others where, you know, we put clean apples in, and then we have a third cooler that is our overflow cooler that we aren't using. I mean, right around Honeycrisp season is about when we hit our peak apple season, so we end up being able to have a little bit, we have enough space to use that as our 55-degree cooler, which aligns really well with winter squash too. So we're able to have our winter squash in there for a little bit while we're trying to get inventory down. So
Great. We've got a few minutes left. You may know that my favorite apple is the Gold Rush, but I'm curious what your favorite varieties are and your customers' favorite varieties that you might want to share with other folks on the webinar, on the
yeah,
show today.
Gold Rush is delicious. That's Gold Rush is an interesting one because for ripening, in Iowa, depending on the year, we often have to pick that underripe, and it's one that will ripen in storage. A lot of apples won't do that. So Crimson Crisp is a good apple. I think I like it. It's funny, I used to say Sweet 16 was my favorite. I think my palate's changed. It's a little too sweet for me now. And I think also because it's such a pain. I mean, we have to go through and pick it some years 4 different times, and we have, I think, 350, maybe 400 Sweet 16. So it takes a long time to have to, you know, go up and down that ladder 4 times over that many trees. But this year, we really have liked our Arlet. It's also known as Swiss Gourmet. It's a red apple. It has kind of a honeyed flavor. There's a little bit of tartness, sort of like honey has a little tartness at the end. And it's just like a really unusual flavor. I'm still holding out hope for Holstein, which we don't have a really big crop this year, but it's a German apple, and it's sort of it's more of a coppery brown color. And it's a firm apple, and it's sweet. It kind of has like hints of pineapple to it. I think I basically have a favorite every season or every time of year, because I generally like a little bit more tart apples, but right now I think Silken are delicious, and they're like a mild, delicately flavored apple. Later in the season, Suncrisp and Gold Rush are some of my favorites. I guess you can see why I have 50 varieties, because we just can't pick a favorite. Yeah.
Well, fair enough. And we're reaching the end of the time, but Emma, I just want to say I'm so glad that you guys didn't get the worst of the derecho there
yeah.
in Central City, and that you're having a decent season. So thank you again, and wish you well on the rest of your harvest.
Yeah, I hope everyone else has a good rest of their harvest too.
All right, great. Well, Phoebe, why don't you bring that slideshow up for me, and we'll close it out here. Everyone on Facebook, thank you so much for attending this live event today. If you want to rewatch or share with your friends, I know there was a lot of detail in there, so this recording will be available immediately on Facebook and also on our YouTube channel and website. You can also sign up using the link that Phoebe posted in the chat box to receive day of event reminders for all of our upcoming virtual field days. Yes, there are more field days on the horizon. It's only September. We are not done yet. The virtual marathon continues. Also, please take a few minutes to complete the evaluation posted in the comment box. For participating, you'll be entered to win a PFI water bottle, and most importantly, we'll receive your feedback. So again, thanks to Emma and Marcus for taking some time out of their day today to show us around. And until next time, stay healthy, help your neighbors, and enjoy the sunshine.